Big Pit Blaenafon has a special place in Welsh history and indeed in the world's history of industrialization. Here, as in many of the older Welsh mines, a few generations of workers, many of them coming from different parts of the world, toiled to produce the coal that fueled Britain as a global economic power. This video focuses on the lives of a group of miners who all worked at Big Pit Colliery and all have interesting stories to tell. Through their eyes and through the sound of their own experience, we can hear the living history of the huge social and economic changes that have come in their century, the 20th century. You'll hear about the horrific accidents, the rats in the blackness underground, the injustice and the poverty. And the men will also tell of their special relationship with the pit ponies, the ways that they spent their leisure time, the fun and family life. Coal mining first began in the Blaenafon area of North Gwent in the 1780s in order to produce coal for the furnaces of the local ironworks. The present shaft of Big Pit was sunk in 1880. And whilst this was the biggest colliery in the area, there were other workings nearby at Milfrain. Big Pit is 90 meters, about 300 feet deep. In the 100 years of the life of the colliery, 9 seams of coal were worked on different levels. Most of them were very narrow seams, with men working at 2 feet 3 inches in order to dig the coal. Some of the coal was for the steam railways of Britain, but most of it was carried by train down to the docks at Newport and Cardiff for export to India and to Africa and Latin America and most of the other places of the world. Industrial South Wales grew rapidly in the 2 decades between 1890 and 1910, absorbing immigrants at the same rate as the United States of America. In the years before the First World War, people poured in from Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium and Germany. There were already a large number of Irish people in the valleys, and many Italian families arrived to work in the coal industry and later to open cafes and fish and chip shops and ice cream parlors. Over the years of this population explosion, the long terraces of houses were built on the sides of the valleys, and shops and other commercial and social amenities were developed. But there were never enough houses to prevent serious overcrowding, and the facilities in the small towns like Blaenafon were always very limited. Times were hard. Coal at this time was cut by hand, so the production was in direct proportion to the male population. Simply put, the more miners, the more coal was dug. Output in the South Wales coalfield peaked in 1913. At its busiest, Big Pit employed 1,300 men and had an annual production of 250,000 tons of good steam coal. One of the great tragedies to hit the Blaenafon community came in 1929 with the explosion at Milfrain Colliery. Mr. Meredith was just coming up after doing a shift underground when he heard an enormous rumbling.
But on the day of the explosion, I was working nights in the colliery with my father. And I used to always travel what they call the Milfrain Park with a little chap by the name of Evan Williams. He was not actually all together in health, but we became good pals. But unfortunately, he was killed in the explosion.
Russell Powell was in the school playground at Garnerero and saw the rescue services heading towards Milfrain.
Well, I was only about 8 years old, about 8 or 9, I expect, when that happened. Well, that's all I can tell you was I was on top of the school down here, on the school wall, and we were watching them coming across, the Garn Road.
Jim Matthews had just started working at the pit as a young collier boy. He remembers the sense of confusion, and the noise of the pit ponies crying out in pain has stayed with him all his life. Jim found himself calling to his father, who he realized was on the other side of the fall, and was amazed that he wasn't hurt. 9 men were killed that day. But as if the death of 9 men and injuries to many more wasn't enough, there was a macabre twist to events. A collier who worked at Milvrain was in a disturbed emotional state that day and didn't go to work. He swapped shifts with his friend, who tragically was killed in the explosion. Meanwhile, the collier who had stayed home because of matrimonial problems became so deranged that he killed his wife, his child, and then himself.
We were sent home from school and we wondered why. And we found out after that our school teacher had been murdered by her husband. He shot her and committed suicide himself.
Milvrain Colliery never returned to full production after that awful day. Over the years, the men of the Big Pit experienced many changes which had a great impact on their lives. One of the changes involved the installation of showers at the pit head. That happened in Blaenafon in 1939. No longer did they have to traipse home with thick black coal dust covering them from the waist up, and then go through the arduous task of bathing in a house without a bathroom where all hot water had to be boiled in buckets on the fire. Frank Beecham tells us of his trials. He was the youngest in his family, so he'd be the last to have a bath. Coal dust wasn't the easiest of dirt to wash off, especially after 3 others had washed in the same water before you.
Well, this is the Pit Head Baths. It was opened in 1939, made contributions from the Miners' Union and also from the NCB. Now, we thought it was a big advantage using this because previous to that, we'd have to walk home in our dirty, wet clothes, and I would have all the muck in the house. And your mother used to have a big bath in front of the fire. She used to fill this with boiling water off the range, and it was hard work for them. And then they had to dry your clothes afterwards, ready for the next day. So we found this a big advantage for us.
At Big Pit, you can see the baths laid out in sequence. Entry was through the dirty entrance used by miners at the end of their shift. Firstly, they would clean their dirty boots on the apparatus along the wall, which had rotating brushes driven by electricity. They'd also regularly grease their boots on the cast iron greaser near the entrance. That was essential when the colliers worked for much of their time in water underground. There were, of course, many rules and regulations about the use of the showers. The men were penalized for misdemeanors by the supervisors, who could impose fines and even suspensions for unruly conduct, bad language, carrying glass bottles through the showers, or spitting.
The attendants used to see as we had hot water when we came up. They got boilers in part of the building here. They'd keep those stoked up. They'd also keep this all clean and really see that it was running well. If you didn't do what he was told, he was banned, and then he was back. He would go back bathing in the house again, until he promised, I should think.
Work underground held many dangers. Roof falls, lethal gas explosions, accidents with machinery, flooding,